Good morning again, and thank you all for being here with us today for the HBA of Durham, Orange, and Chatham Counties Housing and Development Summit. This is the first of three very important conversations about the state of our industry. My name's Lee Bowman. I'm the founder and president of Legion Land and Development and serve as the 2023 board president for the HBA of Durham, Orange, and Chatham Counties. First of all, please stand with all of us and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you all. This is really exciting, but before we begin, I think it's important to thank the sponsors of our association for their generous support. Here with us today are our corporate sponsors: Mebane Lumber and Window Building Supply, Builders First Source, our diamond sponsor is J. Hoffman Design Studio. Our gold sponsors are 84 Lumber, Chatham Park Preston Development, Professional Builders Supply, and our silver sponsors for the HBA are Bost, Custom Homes, and Wilkinson Supply Company. Thank you, sponsors, for your year-round support of the HBA. And for our sponsors of today's event, without such support, we would not be able to bring you the best-in-class thought leaders like our speaker today. Our event sponsor is Bost Custom Homes. Thank you, Rex, Evan, and team for your generous support. Our breakfast sponsor this morning are Morningstar Law Group, Triangle Community Coalition, and Thomas & Hutton. Community sponsors are Chatham Park, Homegrown Realty, Kenley Horn, and MI Homes. And thank you to our table sponsors for today's program: APG Companies, CapCov Ventures, Legion Land and Development, McAdams, New City Design Group, Pabst Design Group, and Wilkinson Plumbing Supply. We're also really pleased and wish to give a special welcome to our elected officials who are here today. From the city of Raleigh, we've got Mayor Marianne Baldwin and council members Jonathan Melton, Jane Harrison, and Christina Jones. From the Orange County Commissioners, Anna Richards. From the town of Chapel Hill, Mayor Pam Heminger and council members Ty Wynn and Camille Berry. From the town of Hillsborough, we have Matt Hughes as a commissioner. And from the Durham City Council, Leonardo Williams and Javier Caballero. From the Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners, Mayor Cindy Perry and Commissioners Kyle Shipp and John Bonnets. And from Chatham County Board of Commissioners, Chair Karen Howard. Are there any other elected officials we may have missed?
Brent Gant, Town of Apex.
Brent Gant with the town of Apex. Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, there's also several municipal staff present here today, and I'll forego reading their names, but please stand so we may recognize you for all you do for our industry. Thank you again. So it's with tremendous amount of excitement that we bring this Housing and Development Summit to our region. As the HBA of Durham, Orange, and Chatham Counties, we take pride in our reputation for doing things differently, and this summit is a perfect example of what you can expect from our association and our leadership. As board president, I've challenged the HBA to think about the future of our communities and how we as leaders can and should help shape our region during this time of unprecedented growth and associated challenges. Several months ago, one of our new board members, Evan Bost, approached the board with a bold idea to bring thought leaders from across the globe here to the Triangle to share their insights and help guide our members and our municipal partners. Today's the first in that series of three summits. At this time, I'd like to ask Evan to come to the stage and share more about his vision, including information on the upcoming summits, and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Lee. Get my notes here. So it's been an honor and a privilege to put this together, and you guys look fantastic this morning. Thank you so much for being here, every single one of you. I want to thank the committee that stood up with me and believed in this cause. So thank you, Lee Bowman, also George Linney, Eric Chupp, Melissa Ortiz, and of course the HBA DOC President, Holly Friccara. I challenge you all to be open-minded, and I think you'll be inspired by this morning's presentation. I encourage you to write down any questions that may come up through the presentation. Save it. We will have a Q&A session at the end. And before I introduce Chuck to the stage, I just want to give you guys a little bit of the background on why I thought this event was important for our region. We have tremendous challenges facing our growing region, and the negative externalities of growth are already here. I believe you've probably seen housing affordability, increased homelessness, lousy transportation options if you don't own a car, environmental damage, infrastructure shortcomings, you name it. I wanted to share just a quick little story. I mentor a young man in South Raleigh. He's 22 years old. He has a high school diploma. He does not have a driver's license. He cannot afford to own and maintain a car. He's held dozens of jobs at various fast food restaurants and quick service lunch places, and Amazon actually in their distribution center. But he told me one time that he lost a job opportunity at McDonald's because they asked him what was his form of transportation, and he said Uber, and that wasn't an acceptable answer for them. It's become clear to me that we will not dig ourselves out of these challenges with the toolbox that we've inherited, the systems, procedures, and especially the cultural values that we've inherited and that have brought us out of pre-modern times to today have reached an inflection point. And I believe that it is our responsibility to find a better way forward. When I first started reading Strong Towns, I thought it was just an urbanist advocacy group making the case for smarter street design, mixed-use developments, bike lanes, that sort of thing. But after diving through Chuck's talks and reading his two most recent books, I've come to realize that Strong Towns at its core is a philosophy that merges city building with societal resilience and really what makes us human. Chuck's work has given me a new understanding of why we are meant to live in community with one another, why we are meant to actively participate in the betterment of the place we call home, and why we are meant to contribute to the betterment of those that live around us. Strong Towns is a roadmap that identifies the changes we must make in our land use planning, our transportation systems. Don't get me started on the financial systems. But for me, it's a challenge that we must make to change our hearts and our minds. A strong town is rooted in humility, empathy, trial and error, honesty, and from those virtues grows a built environment that reflects the human spirit and is poised to handle the challenges that we're going to face with resilience. I hope you find something similar here this morning. So with that, I'd like to introduce the founder of Strong Towns and one of my heroes, Chuck Marohn.
It is always amazing when people, there we go. It's always amazing when people talk about ideas that you have been such a deep part of. Let me say this a different way. When you're standing up here saying, here's what Strong Towns is, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm all that. I'm that. So great job. I mean, I love the way it's reflected back, and it's beautiful, very perfect. A prophet is never without honor, except in his own land. And I would be remiss if I did not start today, because I come from a small town in central Minnesota. I think people who invite me to speak in places and invite me to be part of their conversation think that, oh, your city must be the greatest city, so well designed, so loved. You must be really appreciated there. No, it's the exact opposite. And so I'm here today, and I actually am embarrassed that I forgot this. But your city is home to one of North America's greatest planners, greatest thought leaders, and someone who I not only have an immense amount of respect for, but have learned a ton from and have a deep amount of gratitude for. And I don't know if you know this or appreciate it, but outside of this room, Mitch Silver, who is sitting right over there, is one of the most beloved and respected and admired people in the world of planning, city building, and is an immense thought leader. And I wanted to take a moment to say thank you, because he's done so much for me, but he's also done so much for this country. And I know, when they're our neighbors and our friends, we get used to it. We understand, we take it for granted. And I just wanted to shine a big spotlight, because outside of this room, this guy is the man. So thank you. I also, here in Raleigh, the sun is always shining, right? It's always your day in the sun. I'm reminded of economist, philosopher Tomas Sedlacek, who talks about building an economy, in a sense where it's always sunny, there's no rain, everything is, he has this analogy of a boat, and he's like, where the wind is always at your back. And there's a certain aspect of that here in Raleigh. And I get that vibe when I'm here. I've been here a handful of times. And I'm going to tell you, I get that vibe in California in the same way. We're always growing. It's always great. Everything is always working out. We can fix these problems because grow, everything. Everybody wants to be in California. I think we can step back and look at California today as outside observers and say that narrative is not necessarily true. I want to talk, we're going to talk about housing today, and I want to get deep into that, but I want to start with this image as, in a sense, a warning or a cautionary tale, because I don't think the sun is always shining. I think this is a beautiful place full of wonderful people, but I caution you not to let that make you unserious or make you blasé or make you lose the humility that Evan talked about in terms of where we're at in the world and what our future looks like. This is a map of the city of Lafayette, Louisiana, that a colleague of mine, a guy named Joe Minicozy, put together. His firm out of Asheville, North Carolina, is called Urban 3. They do 3D modeling of financial productivity of cities. And together with his team, I spent a year and a half periodically in Lafayette, Louisiana, evaluating their city's financial situation and trying to answer the question, why are we broke? Why do we have no money? Lafayette, Louisiana, and I'm gonna give you this context. There's different ways to look at this, but I'm gonna give you a context that I think will work here in this room. Louisiana, obviously a deep red state politically, very conservative place. If you go to Lafayette specifically, I think you will find a government that is fairly lean and fairly prudent, also very pro-growth. What do we need to do to make the next project happen? They have large economic development authorities, large builders associations, and they are all about the next project. How do we keep things going? And the idea is that, and it's a very American idea, it's a very kind of growth model, is if we can just keep growing, if we can just keep adding that next thing, everything is going to go really well for us. And they've been very successful at that model for decades and decades and decades. I've got some data from Lafayette that we're just going to look at briefly in a bit, but they've grown their population since World War II by 350%. It's been an immense amount of growth. They're a very pro-growth place. Yet the mayor, a guy named Joey Durrell at the time, recognized that they didn't have the money to maintain even their basic street network. In fact, Joey Durrell was at the end of his term. They have term limits there, so he was getting term limited out. And they have a tradition in Lafayette, Louisiana, that when you're at the end of your term, you will advocate for a sales tax increase for road funding. because no one in Louisiana can advocate for a tax increase. That's crazy talk. But someone who's not going to run again for re-election can do that. And they're considered to be the sacrificial lamb that will go and do that. The chamber generally supports it. The home builders generally support it. But, quietly under the table, well, maybe we have to do this for growth, right? The mayor was looking at this and said, Chuck, we have a $50 million backlog of road maintenance. It's a 25-year backlog of maintenance. If we raise taxes the way the chamber and everybody wants me to, is pushing me to, we'll cut that backlog from 25 years down to 22 years. I can't responsibly, I'm a fiscally prudent person. I'll raise taxes to pay for this stuff, but this is not working. Why? And we took this year and we went through and we looked at every ongoing expense that the city had. Where are all your roads and your sidewalks and your pipes? Where's your drainage systems? Where's your street lights? Where are your parks and your public buildings? And we added all these things up. And we did, from an economic standpoint, we put them into an annual value. Here's our ongoing annual cost to run this community, this city, this municipal corporation of Lafayette, Louisiana. We then looked at every revenue stream that they had. All the property tax, the sales tax, the utility fees, all this stuff. And we mapped all those out too. We said, here's where all those are at. And when it was done, we mashed these maps together. There's about 36 of them, expenses and revenues. We mashed them together and we got this map here. So what you are looking at the cost of about $500,000, so this was a big, big project, is a profit and loss statement for the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. Every place where you see a blue property is a property where the city is collecting more in revenue and fees on an annual basis than they are spending to provide ongoing service and maintenance. And every place where you see red is the exact opposite. These are places that are costing more to provide ongoing service than they contribute to the municipal corporation in terms of taxes and fees. Now, if this were, cities are municipal corporations, and you'll hear me use that over and over. We are incorporated the same way a corporation is incorporated. We run differently, right? But if this were a corporation, what you are looking at, if you were going to look at it through like a private sector corporate mind, in blue, you have your profitable divisions, and in red, you have your losing negative divisions. And what you would do in a good company is say, we're going to keep the blue and really invest in that. The red, we're going to get rid of, or try to find a way to make it blue, right? Let me give you a notion of what these neighborhoods look like. That blue area in the middle with the highest lines, by the way, the higher the line goes, the more the disparity is. So the blue ones that are really high, those are really, really profitable parcels. That's their core downtown. You have a very lovely downtown. You have, there's always this fine line when we don't know each other really, really well of being real and being complimentary. You have a very nice downtown. Obviously, I think there's a lot. Yeah, I'm from Minnesota. That's as mean as we get. There's some work to do, right? But I feel like you're trending in the right direction and there's a lot of momentum there. Lafayette, Louisiana also has a very nice downtown. I think they would rather have yours, but theirs is not horrible. That downtown is that center core. That upper right photo is what their downtown looks like. A lot of single or two-story buildings, not very grand. It doesn't, how do I say this and be kind? No one goes to Lafayette, Louisiana, goes downtown with a camera and snaps a bunch of photos and does their Instagram shoot, right? Like, this is not glamorous. Financially, it's completely killing it, right? It's amazing. There's a crescent of blue that runs to the right of that core downtown. Those are the poorest neighborhoods in the city. I took a little snapshot of what one of those looks like, the shotgun shacks, very poor kind of places. Despite the poverty, They are having an immense positive impact on the city's balance sheet, year after year after year, paying more in taxes and fees than they require in service. And just so we're clear, when I say require in service, the underlying assumption of our study as we went forth was that the city would go out and perform this service and maintenance. The city would go out and fix the roads and maintain the ditches and fix up the parks and do all that. The fact that they're not doing that in that poor neighborhood only means that in reality, the blue line is higher than what we're showing here. The red stuff, and you can kind of see where this is going, right? The red stuff is all that stuff out on the edge. The strip malls, the big box stores, the drive-through franchise restaurants, the gas stations, the windy cul-de-sac-y streets with the large homes on them. Deep red. The further you go out, the redder it becomes. I want to give you the number, and the number I want to give you is designed to help you recognize that the sun is not always shining. Or in a better case, we can make the wind blow in our sails artificially for a very long time. In Lafayette, Louisiana, the median family, so half the families more, half the families less, the median family when we did this study paid $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. There are other taxes they pay to the parish and the school district and what have you, but $1,500 a year to the city. In order to make good on every promise that the city has made, to fix every road, maintain every pipe, take care of every park, do all the stuff that the municipal corporation has said we will do, that we all expect them to do, the median family's taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. One out of every $5 a family makes, we need to get taxed somehow and sent back to the city, and that's just to maintain what they have. What has happened in Lafayette, Louisiana, and what we see happening in cities around North America is that Lafayette has grown itself into insolvency. It has actually grown itself in a way that gives it a short-term sugar high, a short-term illusion of wealth financially in exchange for enormous long-term liabilities. I started this conversation by saying that Lafayette had a 25, boy, I think back of what I said. I think I said 25. I meant 50-year. They had a 50-year road backlog. That road backlog has now grown to, why is my brain, I'm really good with numbers, and for some reason I just messed up the actual number. They had a $50 million backlog, that's what it was, 25-year. It has now grown to a $125 million backlog, gone the opposite direction, despite raising taxes to maintain their roadway systems. In Lafayette, Louisiana, when you go there, they will say the sun is always shining. They will say Lafayette, Louisiana experiences lots of growth. Look at how successful we have been. Local government balance sheets are designed to hide long-term liabilities. They are designed, local governments operate on a cash basis year to year. They're designed to balance a budget year after year, but to ignore the long-term liabilities we take on. When we do a new development, we get cash from that new development. We get revenue coming in from that new development, and that shows up in year one on our balance sheet. But we agree as part of that new development that we will fix the road, that we will fix the pipe, that we will provide the services that go along with that. And those costs show up a generation later. Lafayette, Louisiana has grown themselves into decline. When I look at your city, when I experience your city, what I see is a development pattern that largely mimics that of Lafayette, Louisiana, that largely imitates that of other North American cities. A development pattern pioneered by the city of Detroit. Here's how we build an auto-oriented, diffuse, spread out city with a tax base that is really expensive to provide services to, but is very, very diffuse over this large area. That's as mean as I'm going to get today. So I wanted to start with that because I want us to kind of divorce ourselves from the notion as we go through this conversation that the triangle is different. Someone said to me yesterday, we're the last ones into the recession and the first ones out. Keep telling yourself that. That's very, that's not humble, is it? No. When we think about cities, and I have a whole chapter in my first book about complex systems, I want you to think for a second about a rainforest. A rainforest is a complex adaptive system. We recognize that a rainforest has a variety of flora and fauna that interact with each other in novel, unique ways. They're all independent from each other. When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that it has a certain order to it, but that order is not imposed. That order emerges from all of these complex interactions. Generally, we find it very easy to recognize that a rainforest is a complex adaptive system. Sometimes it is a little bit more of a stretch for us to look at cities of the past and see their complex adaptive nature. We got a tour yesterday of some very beautiful neighborhoods in your city, and it was remarked more than once that these neighborhoods were built prior to zoning codes and prior to building codes and prior to all of the kind of orderly things that we assume today are required to create a place. Cities of the past had none of these. And if we look at them and study them, what we see is that they were not all perfect, they were not all beautiful, they were not all wonderful. They had many things that were great challenges for them. But those challenges were, in a sense, harmonized and balanced in this complex adaptive framework. Cities of the past were complex adaptive systems. And let me put it this way. If there's an alien species that is studying the Earth, like let's say came to the Earth 150 years ago, and they look down and they're like, ooh, interesting species. There's these things called bees. They live in beehives. That's their habitat. There are deer and they live in the forest, and that's their habitat. There's ants, and ants go out and build ant mounds, and that's their habitat. And there are these things called humans. They walk around on 2 feet and wear weird clothes. They build their habitat is cities. This is what they build. Complex adaptive systems, very, very similar, evolved in a sense with us. Complex systems are different than systems that are merely complicated. A Rube Goldberg machine is really, really complicated, right? The complication is part of the novelty. There's a lot going on here. But we recognize that if we cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the Rube Goldberg machine doesn't evolve and adapt. It just breaks, right? It just stops working. We think of an automobile engine as a really complicated thing. The people who built an automobile engine are really, really smart people. But we recognize that if you stress an automobile engine too much, it doesn't evolve and become a wash machine or a toaster. It just breaks. It just stops being an automobile engine. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. A rainforest, if it gets too much sun or too much rain in any one season, doesn't fail, doesn't collapse. It will evolve and adapt. Different flora and fauna will become more dominant within the ecosystem, but we still expect there to be a rainforest after a season of odd weather. Take something that is more optimized for efficiency, like a cornfield. And we recognize that a cornfield gets a little too much rain or a little too much sun in one season. It doesn't evolve and become soybeans or potatoes. What happens to a cornfield? It just fails. It just stops being good corn. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated, that capacity and ability to adapt and change and evolve over time. The pre-Great Depression development pattern of Raleigh, the pre-Great Development pattern of North America, the pre-Depression development pattern that we see around the world, going back thousands and thousands of years, was one of complexity and adaptability, one of incremental growth and change. The marketing brochure of post-World War II development is stasis. We are going to build for you, we are going to plan, we are going to engineer, we are going to regulate into existence the absolute perfect development. And then once we build it, it will be that way forevermore, world without end. And that is not how humans work. That's not how cities work. That's not how places work. That kind of imposed stasis is not a reality. It is a reality that we have experienced due to this, in a sense, momentary blip, this sugar high of prosperity that we've been able to create. But it is not reality as reflected or experienced by humans ever in human history. The way we build cities generally is a very messy proposition. This is my hometown. This is Brainerd, Minnesota, which, by the way, just so you know, I came here yesterday to your very nice city. When I got in my car at 3:30 in the morning and drove to the airport, it was -3 degrees. We now have a winter storm watch at home for the next 2 days. The snow is about this deep. It is the end of March. I am angry about this. We tolerate winter, we like it, but we don't like it in April. And for some reason, we're gonna have winter in April. This is what my city looked like back in 1870. And what you're looking at here, in a sense, something that would be indistinguishable from what Raleigh looked like in its very early days, what Savannah looked like, what Asheville looked like. Every city in all of human history that was founded and built prior to this kind of new suburban experiment began just like this. Some pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about the future. I have some photos of Manhattan that are a little bit later than this in time, but essentially like this. You can think of Manhattan as one point being a little settlement of pop-up shacks. Some people show up, they chop down the trees or use what materials are on hand, throw up these little shacks and make a go of it. We built thousands of these across North America, and a lot of them failed. What happens when a neighborhood like this fails? Do we have to have bailout of Wall Street banks, right? Does unemployment skyrocket? Does the stock market crash? Of course not. These are just little bets. They're little experiments, a little gamble on the future. If they don't work out, people salvage what they can and they move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across North America, and for a variety of reasons, a lot of them were very successful. And when they were successful, something very simple, but also very magical would happen. They would start to grow. They would start to grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish, right? It grows out in every dimension. That is what would happen in this complex adaptive system known as a city. From a financial standpoint, the mechanism is actually kind of simple to understand. As more and more people would move to this place, the land underneath these buildings would become more valuable. There's more demand for a finite supply of land. The middle of town would become more valuable. After a decade or two, these little hastily constructed buildings would start to fall apart. That combination of rising land values and crumbling structures creates a natural redevelopment pressure where it makes sense in a marketplace, in a complex adaptive system, to acquire that property and redevelop it, rebuild it in a different way. And so after 3 decades, this little street here would become this street. And after another 4 decades of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally thickening up and becoming more mature and intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. This is the complex adaptive system at work. This is the historic parts of Raleigh reflected in a small Midwestern town. This is a pattern that we see and experience all over the world prior to the new idea that we could build something all at once to a finished state and have it be locked in stasis forever. This is a very weird presentation because I'm writing a book right now with a colleague of mine about housing and housing policy. So as I'm putting this together, I have like a gazillion thoughts in my head, which means I tend to ramble when I get into a presentation mode. But we have a little bit of time, so I can do that. If you think about this complex adaptive pattern of development, what housing was prior to the Great Depression was a very hyper-local undertaking. If you were going to get a mortgage in the early 1900s, that mortgage would be at a local bank. That was your only option. You would have to have 50% down payment. 50% of the value of the home would have to be equity up front. Your mortgage would be a 5-year mortgage, most likely. Maybe if you were very wealthy, they would do a 7-year. There's a handful of 10 years, but most of them were 5-year products. And kind of the unique thing for us today is that they were all interest-only loans. There was no amortization, no paying this off. When we reached the Great Depression, we had gone through in the 20s this period of very rapid growth. And when the economy changed, what we found is that home prices dropped dramatically. And what would happen is that not only were there a lot of people in distress because we had very high levels of unemployment. When you lose your job, it's difficult, obviously, to make your mortgage payment. People were getting kicked out of their homes. Banks were foreclosing. When you foreclose on a house, the bank doesn't want to own a house. So what does the bank do? Tries to sell it into a market with high unemployment, driving down prices. When you drive down prices, but you have people in their house who have a job or have a way to make payments, everything is kind of stable still until you hit that reset. The reset in this case would have been the end of the 5-year window, paying the interest-only loan, and now the balloon comes due. And in prior times, if the market was stable or slightly growing, refinancing that balloon was no big deal. We would roll that over at whatever the new interest rates were. This 5-year thing was kind of a hedge for the bank because local banks can't take 30-year interest rate risk. They just can't do it. So it was a good hedge for the local bank. But all of a sudden, if your property had fallen by 20%, 30%, 40%, and you started out with 50% equity, and the bank is saying, we'll refinance this for you at 50% equity, everybody in this room recognizes what happens. The family has to come up with cash at the refinance to make up that difference in equity. And nobody could do it. Very few people could do it. People struggled to do it. And so all of a sudden, people who could make their payments, who could stay in their house in normal times, could continue on if the bank would just roll over their loan, were getting foreclosed on and kicked out of their houses. That's a hardship and that's a tragedy. But let's look at the financial implications of that. Local banks in a distressed market foreclosing on people who could stay in their homes, then doing what? Selling those homes back into the market. Were creating their own cycle of decline. They were loading and filling an already oversaturated market with even more product. And so when the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration came in and launched the New Deal, one of the things that they did very early on, they came into office in March and they did this in mid-June, is to create the Homeowners Loan Corporation. The Homeowners Loan Corporation took the properties that were being foreclosed on off the books of the local banks and refinanced them for the people who were in them. They said, you can't make this large payment? Okay, we're gonna refinance this for you over 20 years to keep you in your home and stabilize it. There were a whole bunch of programs in the New Deal, including the founding of the FHA, the creation of Fannie Mae to create a secondary market for mortgages that took a mortgage market that was highly localized and very sensitive to market conditions and had, in our growth economy, this idea that things could spiral downward and put a floor under that and said, we are going to stop the decline by, in a sense, nationalizing or using the power of our great nation to stabilize and put a floor under how low things can go. I am going to offer, and I'm going to do this recognizing that this is an opinion that has been greatly debated and can be debated even further. I'm going to offer that this is a very humane and decent thing to do, and that in all likelihood, we today would do the same thing. In fact, if you just look at what we did a couple weeks ago with Silicon Valley Bank, we did something far less. The compassion meter on that is not even relatable here, right? And we did that without hesitation. I'm going to offer that I think if we look back, I guess the point I want to make is there's a certain argument here of complex adaptive systems and letting them fail. And from a purist standpoint, the way you resolve problems in a complex adaptive system is you let them work themselves out and reset in a different way. You let the fire burn. And I get that. I want to put out there as a notion that even if that would have been the right thing to do, we were never going to do it because we had the means to do otherwise. And I think we've demonstrated time and time again that we will exercise those means, especially when there is, as there was in the Great Depression, immense levels of human suffering. During the Great Depression, we created Fannie Mae, I mentioned. I want to, again, put like a little button on that because we followed it up later with the Freddie Mac, creating a secondary market for mortgages. Again, the idea was not just for foreclosed properties, but to actually then start to get people into homes. We would create a marketplace whereby people, instead of having 50% equity, could have 20% equity. Instead of having interest-only loans, they could amortize their loans. Instead of having a 5-year mortgage with a balloon, we could have a 30-year mortgage product at a fixed rate, allowing more and more people to get into homes, which during the Great Depression stopped this downward spiral of home prices. My grandfather was a Marine in World War II. I was actually at my church last week and I noticed again, I've seen it before, but I had some time and I noticed again, there's a little thick plaque on the wall that listed all the people in my hometown who fought in World War II. They must have put it up in 1945 or 46 or whatever. And there's my grandfather under the Marine column. He was one of the first troops into Nagasaki after the bomb was dropped. So that gives you some sense of his age. He was a late entrant. My grandfather grew up in the Depression. When you would talk to him about it, there were some things he would talk about, there's some things he would not talk about. He's that kind of guy. One of the things he told me is that he was able to move into the neighbor's house. They allowed him to sleep in the barn and they fed him. And then he in turn worked the fields. He worked the farm. He was basically like a farmhand. He said to me, he was very fortunate during the Depression. Living in a barn in Minnesota does not seem very fortunate to me. But that's kind of, I've taken that as like the scale of despair, right? For my grandfather to say, I was very fortunate to have that experience, that tells me there was a lot of people less fortunate than him that were having a very difficult time. When we look at the Great Depression and we study it today, we recognize that there is a lot of debate over what caused the Great Depression. We can read economists today who will write, here's the cause of the Great Depression. And you'll read it and you'll say, wow, that is very smart and insightful. And then you'll read another economist, here's the cause of the Great Depression. And it's the exact opposite of the first economist. And you'll read that and you'll say, well, that's very smart and insightful. We don't agree today what caused it. They certainly had no idea what caused it. They could point to proximate causes, proximate events, but no one could, here's the cause. Even more importantly, nobody understood the solution. Nobody knew how to get out of the Great Depression. The whole New Deal project was this attempt to try things and see what would work, see what could get the economy going again. We today are taught in middle school that the thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II, right? Which that shows you that we live in a world dominated by economics. Because only a world dominated by economics would look at global war as being like happy days are here again, right? If you are a bean counter in Washington, D.C., and you're looking, you're like, ooh, 1930 is really bad. Ooh, 1941, things are awesome again, right? Overlooking the fact that, tens of millions of people would die and perish. It's a very, if you're an economist, it's a very dismal science, right? It's a very unfriendly, inhuman place to be often. When we look at World War II as being the catalyst for growth, we did take wide parts of our population and put them to work building the implements of war. We took millions of people and shipped them overseas to kill and to die. We put all these people to work building planes and boats and munitions and what have you for the war effort. There was a recognition amongst the economists around FDR that once the war was over, we were just going to go right back into depression. There's a quote up here by Paul Samuelson, who's probably the premier US economist ever, certainly of the last century. Were the war to end suddenly, there would be the greatest period of unemployment and economic dislocation which any economy has ever felt. If we bring all these troops home and shut down all these industries, there's nothing different about our economy today than there was 10 years ago. And we're just going to go right back to where we were. That was the fear amongst not just the Roosevelt administration, not just economists, but everybody. Did that happen? Of course not, right? Of course not. We did something dramatically different. We created a new version of America. We took our cities and turned them into machines of growth. And even more subtly, what we did is we took these tools that we had created during the Great Depression to stop the downward spiral. And we said, wow, those tools worked really good to stop things from going down. If we turn them the other way, we can make things go up really fast. And that's what we did. We took all of these devices that we used to staunch the bleeding and said, we can make our economy grow and grow and grow. Based on, and let me, I always try to say this in ways that won't get me in trouble. Because obviously the post-war vision for growth, my heart always wants to be as generous as possible to people of the past. I think we fall into this trap today where we look back at people of the past and we assume that we are different than them. This goes to the humility thing again, Evan. The idea that we are different than them, and I'm going to use the word better than them, right? Like given the same set of facts, we would make a different thing because we're culturally different. I think we can look back at the post-war development pattern and recognize that it was not a design that included everybody. I think in our most optimistic sense, the idea was that a rising tide will lift all boats, and we're just going to grow this economy, and we'll ultimately bring everybody with us. We can see in practicality that that is not what happened, and that in fact that was not the emphasis of it. But the idea was that we do not want to be in the Great Depression again because that is bad for everybody. And so if we can get our economy growing, if we can make it so the sun always shines and the wind's always at our back, it makes it way easier to solve a whole bunch of problems that we have. Here's the amazing thing. It really worked. Let me say this. We nostalgize so deeply those couple of decades after World War II. Just ingrained in us, the greatest generation, right? I'm going to say something right now, and if you know yourself to be a hyper-partisan person, I want you to either not listen or just please suppress your partisanship for a moment. Because I want to talk about the 2016 presidential election very briefly. In the 2016 presidential election, we had two candidates with seemingly very different visions for America. As with every election, this is the most important election of our lifetime. Everything is at stake, yada, yada, yada. I get it. I want to tell you, as a strong towns advocate, as someone who looks and thinks a lot about this stuff, what I saw in the 2016 election, what I saw were two 70-plus-year-old candidates describing for us how they were going to recreate the greatest experience of their life, which was the couple decades after World War II. Whether that was a vision of blue-collar families and Ozzie and Harriet families and blue-collar jobs, or whether that was a vision of a federal government that could be very expansive and do things like increase a social safety net, be a difference maker in all kinds of pursuits. That was the same period of time they were talking about. They were talking about the couple of decades after World War II. They were just plucking out different aspects of it. That period after World War II was magical in how easy everything became because of the way we supercharged our cities and the in a sense, financial sugar high that gave us. I want to show you how the development pattern shifted from that incremental, thickening up, bottom-up approach to this very top-down, hyper-growth approach at the end of World War II. I'm going to show you some maps from Fresno, California. I'm showing you maps from Fresno, not because I think you are Fresno, but because I've got good maps of Fresno. But also, I think you will recognize how this rhymes with your place, right? So this is Fresno in 1897. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk over here. Let me see if I can do this without setting off yeah. Because I want to be able to look at this with you. That little yellow part there in the middle, I don't know if this will, let me point this. Here is the city limits of Fresno in 1897. I want you to watch it change now over time. So, 1909, this is that incremental development pattern. 1922, we are having that thickening up in the Petri dish. 1934, the depths of the Great Depression, and then the end of World War II. You'll note that even during the Great Depression, Fresno continued to grow. One of the amazing things about complex adaptive systems is that they grow in good times, they grow in bad times. If you want an amazing book that will help you understand this, read anything by Nassim Taleb. Anti-Fragile is the book that probably comes the closest to describing this effect of experiencing positive change and positive growth during hardship. But at the end of World War II, here's the city of Fresno. Now we're going to start our new suburban experiment. We're going to turn cities into machines of growth. We're going to take all these tools that we use to stop the decline and the depression and use them to boost and juice our economy. So 1958, 1970, 1983, 95, and the last one is 2010. This looks familiar, right? And it should look familiar because this is what we did with every city across the United States. I go to these places where the sun is always shining, and they'll say, Chuck, the sun is always shining here. The wind's always at our back. We're the last into the recession and the first out. And I point out, you are early in the life cycle. I've spent a lot of time in Texas, and in Texas, they make fun of California. And I'll admit this, I take a little bit of I think joy is the wrong word. It rhymes with joy, somewhere in that spectrum, in pointing out to them that they are just California, which needed air conditioning, right? California got started in this experiment very early on. Fresno got started very early on because you've got nice temperate weather there. You don't need air conditioning to live in California. It's nice, but you don't need it. You do need it in Texas. And so Texas is about 2 decades, 3 decades behind California. You just look at their growth pattern, it's the same thing. California gave us Reagan, gave us Prop 13, gave us, all of these very, Texas-esque things during the period of time when they were at where Texas is now today in their growth pattern. It's a very, in a sense, predictable kind of pattern. Let me make one last point about this map. My little city, at the end of World War II, 13,500 people. That's where Brainerd, Minnesota. Today, my little city, 13,500 people. We have the same population we had at the end of World War II. We're 10 times the area. So same number of people, 10 times the amount of road, 10 times the amount of pipe, 10 times the amount of coverage area for our police department, our fire department. This is data from Lafayette, Louisiana. I said they grew 3.5 times after World War II. At the end of World War II, their population was a little over 33,000. Now it's a little over 120,000. It's an immense amount of growth. But when we step back and recognize, we were able to get the water maps from the end of World War II in Lafayette. And what we noticed is that at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide water, drinking water, to the people of Lafayette. Today, it takes 50 feet per person, 10 times that amount. At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people in order to provide fire protection for the people of Lafayette. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. Now, I know there's a certain reaction, and I think there's probably people in the room who have jumped to this conclusion. Well, okay, Chuck, I get it. We've seen a lot of growth. We've grown our liabilities even more, but we're so much wealthier today. We're so much richer today. Our families are better off. We live in bigger homes. We have more cars. We have more stuff. We are just having such a higher quality of life. No one wants to go back to the way people lived at the end of World War II. And the question that I have is, where's the evidence of that? If we look in Lafayette, Louisiana, we see that Lafayette can grow their population immensely. They grow their liabilities by many multiples of that. But when we look at things like family income, it's hardly budged at all in comparison. For the last 40 years, it hasn't budged at all. All of that growth in family income came in the first couple of decades after World War II. When we look at the city of Lafayette, what we see is a similar pattern that we see across North America. We have more families living paycheck to paycheck. We have more families with negative net worths. Yes, we have a lot of stuff, but we owe way more than what we have. This is not a real prosperity. This is, in a sense, a ginned up cycle of growth. Note for a second the way we measure success in our economy. And I'm not stating something here that is profound. There are a lot of people that have pointed this out over the years. We measure what? We measure transactions. If you tax transactions, measuring transactions makes a lot of sense, right? The federal government taxes transactions. The state taxes transactions. Their obsession with transaction is an introspective obsession. How many of you consider your wealth to be based on how much money you made yesterday? That's not the way that we measure wealth. That's not the way communities measure wealth. That's not the way your businesses measures their wealth. There's a balance sheet. Your balance sheet has assets, it has liabilities, and it has equity. We measure wealth in terms of equity. How much wealth have we built and accumulated within our community? When we measure it based on transactions, all of a sudden we at the end of the year get to the end of the year and say, all right, how did our municipal corporation do? Well, this year we issued 1,000 building permits, and this year we built 500 new homes, and this year we had 10 miles more of pipe, and we have 5 miles more of road, and we measure transactions. We don't say our tax base increased by 5% and our liabilities only increased by 1.5%. That would be a legit measure of wealth. That's not how we measure wealth. And if we did, we would find that for every tiny increment of increase in our wealth, we have many, many multiples of increase in our overall liabilities. Oh, did I not show that? This is not my clicker, so the lightsaber works for someone else, but not for me. This is the family wealth that we see in Lafayette, Louisiana. When I said go up by 1.6, this is what I meant. When we look at it in today's dollars, what we are looking at is a tiny, tiny increase in household income. What do we do when our economy experiences distress? It's a very interesting notion. I referred to Tomáš Sedlacek earlier. He is a economist, Sedlacek. He's actually from the Czech Republic. He wrote a book called The Economics of Good and Evil. To me, it was one of the greatest. It is my favorite book on economics. I've read dozens and dozens of books on economics. It's my favorite one. It is translated from Czech, and it is a thick book. So I'm not promising you an easy read, but if you are very interested in this topic, it is a beautiful, beautiful read. It's a deeply intelligent book. Tomáš Sedlacek describes our economy as being manic depressive. We often talk about our economy being depressed, right? Like we're going through a depression, or we're going through a recession, or we're going through a downturn. But what he points out is that we discount the other side, which is the mania side. The kind of violent upturns, the idea of kind of bubbles. We look at that as a positive thing. And if you study the manic depressive condition, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, and I'm also not trying to diminish this in any way. But if you study the manic depressive condition, you will note that the thing that clinicians work on first is controlling the mania. The depressive side is bad, right? It's really bad. But the mania side is the side that it's where people do amazing things, right? You see these artists that are manic depressive, and the manic phase is when they do all their creative stuff, all the crazy stuff. It's the time when you think you can fly, when people jump out of windows, when they do like nutty things. The first thing they do when they treat a manic depressive is they deal with the mania phase and try to get that under control. And then they'll deal with the depressive phase. When we look at our economy, we want to always experience the manic phase. In fact, when we have even the tiniest bit of downturn, we try inevitably to get back to the manic phase. This is a chart of interest rates over since 1982. And it's amazing to me because we're in this time period, and I did last night add a slide that shows where we end up, but let's look at this one first. We have been going through this extended period of time where interest rates have been at all-time historic lows. And it's been fascinating to me to listen to the economic community, and particularly the finance community, talk about this as a normal condition, right? Zero interest rates, or interest rates near zero, is essentially like financially warping gravity. Nassim Taleb, who I referred to earlier, said this condition creates financial tumors in the system. It allows things that in a marketplace shouldn't exist to all of a sudden exist. And the example that I like to use for my own community, we have a strip mall that was built in 2006, a big, huge, high-end strip mall that sat empty for more than a decade. In about 2016, they started to fill a couple of the units, but by 2020, by the pandemic, it was still half empty. But in 2020, right next door to it was being built another strip mall, right? You have 14 years of evidence that there's not enough demand to fill this thing at the prices. And the one they were building was just as big and just as nice as the one that was there. Financial tumors. Low interest rate distort gravity. But the thing I want you to take away from this is that every instance that we have had where things have started to go in the wrong direction, we lower interest rates, right? The housing starts to slow down. Unemployment goes up. The Yankees win the World Series. Whatever bad things happen. I'm from Minnesota. We hate the Yankees. My two daughters, if you ask them, who do Marohns hate? They will tell you, we don't hate anybody except for the Yankees. We have now started to see this little uptick in interest rates. And, we saw before the pandemic, we saw the Federal Reserve trying to push interest rates up. They brought them back down to zero right away when the pandemic started. And now we have the inflation problem. And we're starting to see them go up again. If you listen to financial news, you will hear a lot of panic because people are talking about things breaking. I know we have a lot of developers in this room who have construction loans and loans that they need to get rolled over on projects. And the interest rate change is causing you a lot of distress. It's changing the way you approach your work, changing your timetables and all that. Know that that is going on throughout every part of the economy. Go back and recognize that, I'm going to say this, and you're going to know what I mean. When you have the wind at your back, when the sun is always shining, you can be a grossly incompetent developer and still do really well. And I'm even going to go this far and to say the grossly incompetent developer being drug along by the wind always at our back actually crowds out the really good, really smart, really excellent developer. We should want markets, and especially at the local level, we should want markets that reward excellence. We should want markets that reward good quality investments in our community. The tumors that we have created in our system have not done that. How many of you recognize this chart? This is the Case-Shiller Index. The Case-Shiller Index is an index of housing prices over time. And this is actually not the Case-Shiller. This is just the Shiller long-term home whatever index. Robert Shiller is a genius economist. He wrote a book called Irrational Exuberance. If you heard that term, he's the one who coined it. This goes up to the 2008 housing crisis. What this index does is it looks at home prices in relationship to essentially buying power and buying capacity. So as household income goes up, prices go up. I had some people angry at me in my first book when I talked about women entering the workforce. Understand, I have a professional wife who's amazing, very, very smart. I have two daughters who are approaching college age, and likewise, I have high hopes for both of them. So this was not a commentary on women in the workplace as much as it was 2 wage earners per family. What is the impact of 2 wage earners per family on housing affordability? Did it make houses more affordable? Well, it might have made a household in the early days of that transition easier to afford, because there wasn't, each household had generally one person working full time and maybe one person working in the home full time, but bringing cash into the house, maybe not, or maybe in a small way. Now, having two people in a household working, you would think that it would be easier to buy a home. What actually happened? People could just pay more for houses. And so what we see is that as household income goes up, housing prices go up, and the ratio of the two stays pretty flat. So let me walk you through this chart, because it points out what all of these programs have done to housing prices. We come out of the Great Depression, that's this low part right here, and enter the post-World War II boom up in this area here. And you can see that there's some volatility, but things stay relatively stable in a small band. In the 1980s, we had the S&L bubble, and at the time, we called it the S&L bubble, right? We had the savings and loan crises where banks were doing fraudulent things, pumping money into real estate, particularly in places like Texas and the Carolinas, to a degree. And that created this frothy housing bubble, right? It artificially raised prices. And we look at the 80s and we say that was a housing bubble. That was artificial. And when that bubble popped, prices went back to somewhat of a normalcy. In the 1990s, as we experienced the dot-com boom and bust, the bubble that became the dot-com, lots of money being poured into that, people who made money off of that were buying homes. There was a lot of money sloshing around the system. And we can look back and we see in the 1990s, we had a similar boom and bubble. When the dot-com boom ended, how did we respond from a macro standpoint? We lowered interest rates. We put more money into housing. We tried to go back to that kinetic growth machine from the end of World War II. How do we boost it? How do we get people buying more homes? Because that will get the economy going. It will get people working. It will create jobs. Because the greatest way to create jobs is to get people out building homes and out buying homes. Let's do that. Let's do more of that. And so we said, you really should loan to people who don't qualify for loans. We should broaden the qualification. We should lower the amount of down payment people need. We should encourage banks to do second and third home equity lines of credit to get people into homes with zero down. We should create products that are more flexible, like not just adjustable rate mortgages, but how about reverse amortizing mortgages? How about we don't ask to verify income? How about we juice this secondary market by having interest rates really low and forcing banks and pension funds and other large capital holders who need to get a return in order to make commitments? Why don't we take the risk-free thing off the table, not allow them to make money off of treasuries, not allow them to make money off of municipal bonds, and in a sense, force them to invest their money into stuff like mortgage-backed securities, which will have a higher rate of return and allow them to meet their obligations. And what happened? This is what you see right here, right? And I point this out in this chart because we look back now at the 2001 to 2008 period of time, and with all confidence, with all earnestness, we call it a housing bubble, right? We have no problem making that proclamation, right? This period of time, we say housing bubble. What do we call the period of time between 2010, 11, and today, right? What do we call that? We call that the housing recovery. I'm just going to wait till you get it. So this big thing right here, we can see historically this massive divergence between what people could afford to pay for housing and what the market actually had them pay. And when we study that, we see all kinds of like crazy things happening, right? We see not only the low interest rates, the money being sloshed in to the system, we see more people competing for fewer homes. We see crazy things like people taking equity out every year because prices are going up and using that equity to make their next year's payments. There was one point in the mid-2000s where in California, there were advertisements for this, where you could make more money from your home than you were going to get paid for your job. So you should own as many homes as you can because then you wouldn't have to work. You could just live off the equity in your home like a playa, right? We saw how this ended. We called it a housing bubble. And now today, with all earnestness, we tell ourselves the sun is always shining, the wind is at our back, and we are in a housing recovery. We are, this chart here goes to January of 2019. We were at insane levels before the pandemic. When the Federal Reserve started to raise interest rates, they were looking at this monstrosity, this tumor they created in the housing sector, and they said, we have to try to find a way to temper this. And then the pandemic hit, and what happened to housing prices? They went many multiples higher. If we are going to look at the 1980s and say housing bubble, and we're going to look at the 1990s and say housing bubble, and we're going to look at 2000 to 2008 and say housing bubble, we cannot look today and say housing recovery. We are not telling ourselves something honest if we do that. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I understand how this works itself out. About a decade ago, I remember being asked this question, Chuck, how will this Ponzi scheme kind of end? And I said, well, I think we will be given a decade of very high inflation to try to moderate some of these things. And it was kind of amazing to me when inflation started to rise up. There was a certain class in our society that said, yay, inflation good. Inflation will fix things. And again, if you tax transactions, you measure GDP. If you are loaded up with debt, inflation sounds really great, right? Again, same people, same narrative. But at the end of the day, a decade of high inflation may raise your salary faster than it raises your fixed level debt payments. If you're in a long-term mortgage product, that will stagnate things because people who are in that situation, I have a loan, my mortgage is at 3.5%. I have like no incentive to move, right? That starts to creep into the economy. But even more so, you end up in this situation where after a decade of high inflation, you might be able to afford your house, but you can't afford to put gas in your car or food in your refrigerator, right? It's a different type of pain. I want us to be honest with ourselves about where we're at, particularly because this is I just skipped right through what this was, as if you all know. This is a population pyramid. Demographers do this, and I just realized that this is probably not very gender correct, the way we do things today. I'm sorry, this is the way demographers do things. So you have men and women. I couldn't actually tell you what side was which. But the idea is women are in one color, men are in the other color, and this is their age as a percent of the population. In developing countries, this looks more like a triangle. You have a lot of young people, very few old people. In developed and advanced countries, we have a lot of old people. We keep you around longer. And I said we, I'm turning 50 in 2 months, so I'm getting close. Here's the problem. This group of people in our system needs to buy homes from this group of people. I'm in Gen X. I'm in that echo, that group that everybody forgets about in the middle. Millennials need to buy homes from boomers. What's the mathematical problem with that? It's not that there's not enough millennials. It's that millennials are broke. Like, they don't have any money. They don't have the capacity to buy the homes at the prices that these people up here need it. Particularly when you look at the price being many multiples. At the end of the day, there's some very easy kind of observations we can make about house prices. And I just put this chart together once, and that happened. People started taking pictures of it, and you know that there's some deep insight when people start taking photos of it. You can go to our website and find this chart too. So if we think about everybody, and I say who benefits from high housing prices, I think we could actually go the next word and say who is dependent on high housing prices. In other words, who has, as part of their kind of internal DNA, an optimistic assumption that housing prices now today are normal and will always be this high. Because we're very good at telling ourselves stories that we want to believe. And there's a huge group of people who fit into that category. And here's the observation I want you to take from this list on the left. Who controls the levers of decision-making and power in this country? It's not the group on the right? It's this group on the left. And so when something like a major bank out of Silicon Valley with tons of venture capital money in it goes bad, it takes us 48 hours to realize that we need to spend whatever it takes to make the people who invested in that bank whole. Because we're very sensitive to that. I think the interesting thing, and I said that interesting in a Minnesota sense, the interesting thing that we don't know is as housing prices start to correct, which is an inevitability in a statistical sense, where will that group choose to experience the pain of that correction? So far, they seem to be willing to experience that pain in terms of higher inflation, which makes your job of building more homes more complicated and difficult, right? It's hard to find workers, your supplies are going up, like it makes that tension. But it doesn't make the other tension, which is prices coming down and now you're underwater and there's no market for your product. And I suspect we will choose inflation over a correction in prices. Because again, this group is very sensitive to the correction in prices, and this group doesn't have much power in that. But I don't, quite frankly, know. This is not a scene from my trip to the airport. Although it could be. There's a sense when I look at the housing market today, whether it is the reaction, after World War II, we juiced the economy in this way. We experience this malaise in the 70s, and we counteract it with this period of lowering interest rates and juicing the economy, giving us a series of bubbles that manifest in the housing market. It feels like our policy response is like the vehicle that has hit ice. And if you've ever driven on ice, you know that the right thing to do when you hit ice is to take your foot off the gas and the brake and just let your car move forward, right? The worst thing you can do is try to steer out of it. Because when you steer out of it, the car careens this way, and then you steer back and you careen this way, and pretty soon you've overcorrected and you just start spinning. And it very much feels like that is where our overall policies have gotten us to. So I want to take a little bit of time at the end here and talk about how we respond to this craziness. Because in the 1930s, we took a housing market that was hyper-local and hyper-responsive, And to stop the decline, we made it large, national, now international in scope, to bring those resources in and stabilize things. At the end of World War II, we took those resources to boost it. But what we have done is we have given over control of our local market. We have given over control of our future. We've given over control of our, in a sense, power to direct our own destiny to these higher forces now. The decisions of the Federal Reserve have more effect on your home prices than the supply and demand of your market. And one of the conclusions in the book that we're working on right now is that in a marketplace for houses, we often think that the buyer and the seller are purchasing a home. That's the product. Like a home buyer comes in, buys the home, and the person who owns it sells it to them, and that is the transaction. And the reality is that's not the transaction in our economy. That's just the mechanism to create the transaction. The transaction is a piece of mortgage paper that is sold onto a secondary market that is then subdivided and collateralized with all kinds of other mortgages and sold off as a financial product around the world. That is the product. The way you create that product is to create a mortgage, and the way you create a mortgage is to find a buyer and a seller. But the end product is not a home anymore. It's a piece of paper. How do we get the end product to be a home again? And have it be a home in our community that reflects supply and demand dynamics in our place? I'm going to give you a couple little tidbits of things that we can do right now. The first one is that we need to, everywhere at all times, allow the next increment of development intensity by right. We need to allow every neighborhood to respond in complex ways to both stresses and opportunities that they experience. Yesterday, we were in a neighborhood where there were a bunch of accessory dwelling units, little apartments that had been built on these properties. And one of the things we discussed and remarked was how much this provides for, how much opportunity this provides for families, particularly families who are struggling. There are lots of stories from the early 1900s of widows who are struggling because they are now widowed and don't have income into their household anymore. Yet owning a house or having a mortgage with a lot of equity, right, 50% down, having a mortgage with equity, wanting to stay in their house, and taking the asset they had, which was a house, and doing something with it. Turning the spare bedroom into a bed and breakfast, renting out the room by night, putting a door on the side and making it an efficiency apartment, taking the carriage place in the back and converting it into an accessory apartment and renting it out. A way to make ends meet, a way to stay in your house when the market would otherwise have pushed you out. We don't allow that today throughout most of our city. You're not allowed to do that. Your roof is leaking, you don't have the money to fix it. Better sell and move, because you can't take the spare bedroom in the back and make it into an efficiency apartment and rent it to a college kid. That would, be chaos and disorder and mayhem. These things are all reasonable and prudent things that our ancestors did all throughout human history that we have made de facto illegal. Because the marketing brochure for post-World War II development is a neighborhood built all at once to a finished state, where no change is ever anticipated. We have to allow every neighborhood to experience the next level of development intensity. If you're in a single family home neighborhood, there should be zero regulatory friction to that neighborhood evolving into a neighborhood of duplexes. Just zero regulatory friction. You should be able to go to City Hall at 9 a.m. with a permit application. You should be able to walk out by noon with a permit, and you should be able to start building. This idea that we have to go beg permission from our neighbors, we have to go genuflect in front of a planning board for something that is like the next increment of intensity is wholly ridiculous. But let me put some caveats in this. We have a saying at Strong Towns, no neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood can be exempt from change. No neighborhood should be unrecognizable to the people who live there after an investment. I like to think of it this way. Let's say you've got a kid living in a house who goes away to college for 4 years, and then they come back after 4 years and they look around their neighborhood. No one should say, I don't recognize this place anymore. This place is so different that it's unrecognizable. What we build should fit into the neighborhood. It should be the next level of maturity, like a toddler maturing to an adolescent. But it shouldn't skip 8 levels of maturity. When we do that, what we do is something really destructive and something very distorting. And let me walk you through this in a big sense, because one of the things that we struggle with our top-down housing investment system is that it is very easy to build single-family homes. And I hope you go back to that very first slide of Lafayette and recognize that the more we build single-family homes out on the edge, the more we are trading short-term financial sugar high for long-term financial liabilities. And that is not helping our municipal corporation. But the alternative that is often given to us is, okay, Chuck, let's go and build then using this same kind of top-down capital stream. Let's go build huge buildings and do big transformations. Let's go to the core neighborhoods in our downtown and buy up some of these houses and build large condo units and large apartment buildings, because we can get that financed through this same outside top-down capital flow. Let's look at my example here. We've got 2 units here and a vacant lot. The vacant lot sits between a single family home and a condo unit. And you own the vacant lot. You are going to sell it into the marketplace. How much do you charge for the vacant lot? Well, you can look over at that single family home, and if you said, whoever's going to buy this is going to build a single family home, what you would see is that the single family home is valued at $200,000, and you would recognize that in order to build a single family home on your vacant lot, someone's only going to be able to pay a tiny fraction of that. Maybe you'd value it at, I don't know what I put, $15,000, $30,000, something like that. But if you look over on the other side and you see a condo unit, you see a 5-story, 6-story building, and you realize that that building is worth $10 million, well, now all of a sudden, you could get a lot more money for your vacant lot. I could charge a lot more. Tell me this, would you rather get $1.5 million for your vacant lot, or would you rather get $30,000? We would all rather get that higher dollar amount, right? Well, let me ask you this. When we have this large leap in our development pattern, when we take that vacant lot and we say, we really need housing, we got this product that we can bring in that's very popular all over the country, this 5-on-1, we can build these things, we can get it financed, there's a secondary market for it, it's really great. But yeah, it doesn't fit in with the neighborhood, but okay, we need the growth, we need the investment. The sun is always shining here in Raleigh, so it's all good, right? What is that single family house now worth? It's not worth $200,000 anymore, right? When we distort the land values underneath, what happens to that single family home? Yeah, it goes way, way up. But does it go way, way up as a single family home? No, it goes way, way up as a dead end rental property that we are going to ride down the slope of decline until we can get someone to pay us a premium for the land and remove the house. What happens with this kind of chunky, blocky development pattern where we make these huge leaps is we distort the underlying land values, and we actually suppress the kind of incremental development that we need throughout our neighborhoods. We actually make that unachievable. At Strong Towns, we talk about a city built by many hands. This approach, the large leap approach, is a city built by a handful of well-heeled, well-connected people. A city built by many hands is one that works incrementally across a broad framework. doing a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there, and allowing neighborhoods to, again, like that Petri dish culture, thicken up over time. In order to get a city built by many hands, we have to lower the bar of entry. We have to lower the bar of entry to full participation in our community. Right now, today, if you want to own a home, you have to meet that 30-year mortgage threshold, right? You have to have. I read last week, and I thought this was kind of insightful. It said the credit score is the new redlining, and in a lot of ways it is, because it's a bar of entry that you have to meet in order to fully participate in the rules, the game that we have set up and created. This is something that in my city we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same city would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on the front of this and then created all kinds of rules because a tiny house offends our sensibilities in very odd ways, right? If you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet all the requirements of a house. Then you have to meet, subpart A through M of the tiny house regulations. You have to go ask permission from your neighbors. You do have to go genuflect in front of the planning board. You got to go through this whole process to build what everybody throughout all of human history would have recognized is a starter house. Every city throughout all of human history had lots and lots and lots of starter houses, small houses. And what would happen to a starter house over time? You save up a little bit of money, you put an addition on. You had a child, you created a second story. Your neighbor comes over and helps, you go over and help them. The neighborhood thickens up and evolves and changes. We have made these so impossible to build. We now talk about affordable housing as needing all kinds of massive subsidies and all kinds of massive inputs and tax credits and federal funding here and federal funding there. I get it, because in our current system, how else do you build it? But people built this stuff at scale in prior generations because they were building it with the idea that it would iterate and become more than what it started with over time. If we can lower the bar of entry, we can invite more people in. I want to throw this in because this is a commercial analog to that, but I think it's important for our mindset. These are storage sheds. This is in the city of Muskegon, Michigan. In Muskegon, Michigan, they recognized that they were struggling with entrepreneurship. They had a lot of buildings that people could get into as startup businesses, but the bar of entry was too high. If you wanted to get into one of these buildings, you had to sign a long-term lease. You had to often bring the building up to code, which meant investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial sprinkler systems and what have you. And for someone who is an entrepreneur, which, let's be clear, an entrepreneur is different than an investor. An investor is someone who has money, who's trying to earn a return. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who doesn't understand they can fail, right? They have an idea and a dream and a passion, and they just don't get that this is risky, right? They're so obsessed. So what they have done in Muskegon is they've created a safe space for entrepreneurs. Come in here, start up your business. We want you to try, fail, figure it out. And the amazing thing about Muskegon is that if you go there today, their downtown is full of local businesses, a lot of whom got proof of concept in this very low-risk environment, where the cost of failing was very low. And because of that, they could try crazy things and figure out what worked. Last concept, and this really goes to our government people here in the room. I know in places where the sun is always shining and the wind is at our back, that it feels like the prudent thing to do is to get out in front of the next investment. we're really smart planners if we recognize that we're going to have 67 whatever new families moving here a day, and that means this highway needs to be wider, and this interchange needs to be built, and sewer and water needs to be run here, and if we make it extra deep and build this lift station extra big, we can serve this area. I think that all of that is bad planning. But we hold that up as good planning today. We have built more stuff than we can maintain. We have built more stuff than our tax base has the capacity to support. And so the only responsible reaction to that is to, one, stop building more, and two, go back and figure out how to make better use of the stuff we've already built. How do we take all of this existing infrastructure and get more out of it? That is the only responsible financial response to this situation that we find ourselves in. And the way we're going to do that is not by studying it to death, not by setting up a committee or a commission. The way we're going to do that is to actually go out and figure out in a humble way where the investments we've made are not serving people well. At Strong Towns, we've created a four-step process to make great public investments, a four-step process that should supersede our capital improvements plan and our long-term vision for this and this. This should be the way we do public investments over the next generation. It's very simple. I'm going to walk you through it. Step number one, go out and humbly observe where people struggle. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to emphasize humility here. Humility means in our minds not having a set belief of what we will find before we go out and observe it. Going out and observing with an empty mind and an open heart, saying, let me try to understand authentically where people in this community are having a difficult time utilizing the city as it has been built. Step number two then, ask yourself the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? I'm going to emphasize again, the next smallest thing. In government in particular, we have this tendency to say things like, well, we see this struggle and it's really bad, but 5 years from now, our capital plan says we're going to come in here and do this, so we'll do that. Or, yeah, we see that it's really bad. We'll apply for a federal grant to try to fix that. You're just going to have to suffer for the next 10 years while we work through that process. No. We need to have a sense of urgency and also an understanding of our capacity and also a bit of humility about our diagnosis. And so we need to say, what is the smallest thing we can do? What is the thing we can do with a shovel and paint and straw bales and duct tape and cones to address this struggle and make it a little bit easier for the people who are there? Not solve it forever. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to make it a little bit easier. Step number 3, do that thing. Do it right now. Don't set up a committee. Don't hire a consultant. Don't study it for 2 years. It's a small little thing. Just go out and do it. And then step 4 is to repeat this process over and over and over. For some reason, we have come to expect from local governments some omniscient level of quality of service. And you're going to laugh at that because you're like, we don't get high quality of service from local government. Oh yes, you do. And you expect it, and the residents expect it, and people expect it. We look at Google, and we fully are okay with Google issuing us a beta version of Gmail to try out with all its quirks and all its things going wrong. Because we recognize that in order to get the really good version of Gmail, they got to try out a janky one first, right? They got to let us try and fumble and figure out what's not working. At the city level, what we say is that you must deliver to us perfection all at once. And because of that, cities become dumber. They respond with committees. They respond with big projects. They respond in defensive ways. that deliver us what we at Strong Towns call the least dumb thing that consensus provides. If we want government to be smart, we have to give them room to experiment. We have to give them room to try small things and fail. We have to give them room to go out and do the thing that you scratch your head and go, why are we doing that? Because what happens when we follow this process is that we go out and humbly observe, and we're like, it seems like there's a struggle here. I'm gonna go out and try to address that with the materials I've got on hand. And you go out and address it, and nothing happens. Nothing gets better. And you realize that you actually got it wrong. You know what that is called? Success. Because you learned you got it wrong at a very, very low price. That is the room we need to provide our local governments. If we want them to be smart and tactful, if we want them to do great things, if we want our neighborhoods to thicken up and become more productive, more prosperous, better places to live, financially supporting our community in healthy and productive ways, we have to, as a community, be boosters for small level experimentation at the block level by local government. And we need to give them the room to do it, and we need to loudly support them in that action. If we can do this, if we can change our codes to allow our neighborhoods to thicken up, if we can lower that bar of entry so that the starting spot for people is at a place where they can join in, we will not only be bringing more people into the productiveness of our community, we will not only be doing something very compassionate for our neighbors, but we will find our city becoming stronger, becoming more prosperous, becoming more productive for everybody. And that ultimately is the Strong Towns approach. That's ultimately the Strong Towns vision. It is really hard in prospering cities to look and say, this is the wrong path. We need a different path. As much as I love you, Evan, I want you to keep doing what you're doing. I'm under no illusions that, Raleigh today is going to, do a Nineveh and completely turn around and change everything about what you're doing. But what you can do is get started in a different path. Allow this room to incubate. Because if you can allow this room to incubate, when you do realize that the sun is not always going to shine, that there are rainy days, when the wind does stop blowing at your back and you're like, oh my gosh, we're having a little bit of hardship, you will actually have people here in your community who know how to do the stuff that's going to get you to the next generation. It's going to make you the next success story that's going to keep you in the place where you want to be. Thank you, everybody, for your time. They told me that I could have all the way till 11 o'clock. And so let me say this, as a Minnesotan, I recognize that some of you may need to go do work. Some of you may need to use the bathroom. Some of you may just be sick of me. We're not going to discern between that. We'll assume you all thought this was great and you just have busy things to do. If you have to get up and leave, you're not going to offend me in any way. But I'm happy to take questions and talk about any of this in any way you'd like. Do you need that?
I'm going to thank you, first of all.
Oh, let me say one last thing then. Strongtowns.org is our website. We publish articles every day. They're all free for you to use. They're not only free for you to use, they are Creative Commons licensed. So I tell people, if we've written something and published something that you think is really smart and useful, you can copy, paste, and put it in your own memo and pretend you wrote it. And that is perfectly fine with us. We are trying to share this message with as many people as we can. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. If you find this message very compelling, the one thing we ask you to do is just share it with other people. So please help us spread this message. Help us make Raleigh a strong town. So please.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, man.
That was awesome.
And I will add that I actually give $10 a month to Strong Towns.
Thank you.
I'm a supporter.
Thank you so much.
Hand raised for a question. So the first one back here.
Hey Chuck, long time reader.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so
Been there
much.
For a while. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming at the end of May with the gathering of strong towns?
Oh, so now you just
down the road.
Yeah, you're letting me do promotional stuff. I should have done this. Thank you, because my team will be really angry with me if I didn't. The Congress for the New Urbanism is coming to Charlotte at the end of May. The Congress of the New Urbanism is an organization that we have a very close affinity to. Two of my board members I met at the CNU. For those of you that don't know the CNU, it was founded by a group of architects who are very interested in urban form. Out of CNU, a lot of strong towns ideas were birthed, and we're very proud to partner now with CNU. They have shortened their Congress by a day, so I think they are Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they've invited us to do the first ever Strong Towns National Gathering on the Tuesday evening and Wednesday of that week. So Memorial Day is Monday. If you want to head over Tuesday in the evening to Charlotte, we're going to throw a big party. And the next day, we've got a day of this kind of stuff, Strong Towns-ish, all day. It's going to be incredible. If you want to come, sign up very quickly, because we do have like a limited number of seats, and there's actually starting to fill up. And we're kind of worried that some of our people who are slow on the uptake are not going to get in. But yeah, please come and join us, and bring other people too. There's going to be a lot of breakout things about doing Strong Town stuff, and then there'll be one session that is kind of like this, kind of Strong Towns 101. So if you are brand new to Strong Towns, there's going to be stuff for you. If you're deep into Strong Towns and you're like, I want to roll up my sleeves and do stuff, there's going to be even more for you there. And of course, hundreds of other people who are trying to do similar things. So thank you for that platform. I'm so bad at self-promotion that it's, please, yes.
Leonardo Williams,
Yes.
City Council and monthly sustainer and avid podcast listener.
It's so cool. Thank you.
Might be a little fan.
It's so kind.
However, as much of a supporter I am an elected official, and I'm in this movable elephant
Yes.
of a bureaucracy, and you boggle my mind when you said we have to do things differently. And that is the frustration I live in on a daily. I know what we're doing is not working, but it's like, it's a chisel effect. We're chiseling, we run for office, we make a little impact, we move on to the next person coming in. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how you envision that. And as you were saying it, we call our city Durham the Bull City.
Yeah.
So I now have in my mind this Bull City Beta program.
Yeah.
But if you could just talk a little more about some of the specifics and how our government can, take those initial steps to doing something different.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I have seen this done in many different ways, and I don't necessarily think that there is an exact right way. And so maybe we should talk sometime just about your specific thing. I will give you two examples that I think is potentially a model for you. Because if we go to a city like Memphis, where I've spent a lot of time with their government, they've got deep desperation. And so more things are on the table by default than what you have in a city like Raleigh, right? So there's a county that I worked with in Florida where they created, and it wasn't an innovation team, but I think we could think of it that way. Let me put it like this. As you came to City Hall, and this will maybe work for the developers here, as you came into the government offices and were going to apply to build something, there was the standard process that they used. In Florida, that standard process could take 18 months. I don't know what a development or an application here would take, but yeah, not that long? Okay. 3 years, yeah, okay. Okay, well, you might like this then. So that was the standard process, and you would go to various different departments and get your approvals and go to different boards and committees and what have you. They created this parallel group, and they didn't bypass the process, but they were like Sherpas for the process. But the catch was they were also going to help you with the design. So they were going to try to do all the things we kind of talked about. They were going to try to lower the bar of entry. They were going to try to have good urban form. They were going to try to have different price points. They were going to try to help you build something that would be, in a sense, a more productive, a better product in the community. And if you would go in a sense, work with that team would then be your Sherpa, and they would get your approval in 2 months or 3 months. Like they would go, because they knew everybody there. They would say, we're going to get you on this agenda first. We're going to get you on this agenda first. We're going to go to all these departments. We're going to get these approvals. We're going to work through this for you. We're going to go tell that idiot over there who's always like the problem that he's got to get out of the way and not be the problem. You know, that kind of thing. Because every bureaucracy, private sector, public sector has these people, right? They would work around that. And so what they did is they fostered like a different approach within the government. That story doesn't necessarily have a happy ending because they actually wound up, because cities are political, right? Counties are political. And the idea of that group was that they would create this kind of alternate process, and then over time it would squeeze out the rest because no one would do the normal process. That did start to happen. And the idea was that they would then use that kind of beachhead to transform local government. Instead, the bureaucracy had their own advocates and pressured the elected people to kill the project. So there was a switchover in government. The champions of that like little Green Beret group got voted out. The new group came in, you're gone. So not a happy ending, but I think a great internal strategy, right? I think a really good internal strategy. The second strategy that I would give you is I think we have one of our board members used to be a council member, and he did a session that I'm happy to give you a copy of. It's just a webinar. He said the most effective way to see change happen is to look for opportunities. And so he started his term with a stack of note cards. This is going to sound corny, but this is what he did. When he was running for office, he said, here's the 20 some things that I want to see change on. And I've been in so many city governments where like the newly elected person comes in and is like, I want to see this change and this change and this change. And they come in with all this energy, and then the bureaucracy, which are other elected people and all that, are like, oh, that's cute. Here's a committee to go on, and we'll see you in 2 years. Because we know how to stifle all that stuff. And what John did is he went in and he said, I'm not going to say anything at the first meeting. I'm just going to listen. At the second meeting, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to listen. But I've got my note cards of things I want to accomplish. And every meeting, I'm going to read the note cards before I go in. I'm going to remind myself of all the things I want to do. And inevitably, some mess up is going to happen. And I'm going to be able to insert myself as the fixer in that thing and say, I'm going to cross off something on my list. I'll give you an example. One of the things he wanted was parking reform. They had minimum parking requirements. He wanted to get rid of those. They had a business come in and was working through the process and got into the process, and the city's ordinance required them to have parking, and he did not have it, and that would have meant he had to buy the adjacent building, tear it down, and make it into a parking lot. And everybody knew that was stupid. And so John looked at this and said, aha, this is a chance to get one of my note cards. And he said, look, we're looking at this. This is really bad. I don't want to do anything crazy or radical here, but I think we should study this. Let's get this one approved, and then let's set up and juice. And he used that as like the mechanism for, obviously we don't want this to happen again, right? And he used that as a mechanism to get that reform in place. The amazing thing about it is I've seen so many people run on fixing parking minimums. And they go in and they bring that up as an agenda item, and then it works its way through the agenda, and then everybody kind of coalesces that's going to fight it around fighting it. And I feel like what John did, I feel like the brilliance of it is that he didn't start something till he had the friction in place. So in other words, there was already some momentum to fix something. and he had a built-in champion to do it. I say all this acknowledging I would be a horrible politician. And so I feel like I'm the last person who should give political advice to anybody because I feel like I'm really inadequate in that. But those two strategies are strategies I've seen work to be really effective in getting stuff done. Thank you.
Hey Chuck, Jed Byrne with Withers Ravenel. First, thank you for coming down to Raleigh and joining some of our
Thank you.
Sorry about your snow.
It's good.
You mentioned a few things about changing culture, about being a booster for some of these ideas. There's a lot of people in this room that are practitioners and politicians, elected officials, and a lot of, I think, doers, which is good. In the conversations that I have, I see one of the biggest barriers to some of these ideas, or even just change in general, is a lack of trust. I mean, I think sometimes people don't trust, other citizens. People don't trust elected officials. People don't trust engineers and developers and attorneys, and the list goes on and on. So I won't say that that's the biggest barrier, but I'd be interested to know what you think the biggest barrier to this cultural change, or us being able to be boosters for our cities. What do you think the biggest barrier is, and whether it's trust or not, where have you seen people effectively overcome or get around that barrier?
It's a really good question. There's a very wise man who said, you can't be trusted with large things until you're trusted with small things, right? Show me that I can trust you in small things, and then I will trust you in larger things. I feel like that is a big part of the answer. Look, we live in this. I always hesitate, when we say we live in the most whatever time ever, right? Because what we live in is the most time that we've lived in, and when you read, go read the Old Testament. People are messy, and they've been messy for a long, long time in ways that are, the reason why the Old Testament is a very, even if you are not a religious person, is a book that will be around for a long time, is because it describes human beings in their essence in a way that is relatable to us today, right? Like we can see ourselves in these stories, even though they are ancient people, because we are all still human. I feel like the tension that we're trying to overcome is not a left-right tension. I feel like it is a top-down, bottom-up tension. And oftentimes, the top-down tension manifests as a left-right tension because that is the way the top-down defeats the bottom-up, quite frankly. If we can be drawn against each other, we will give power and authority over lots of things that we could decide to people to decide them on our behalf in a very top-down way. What we always tell people when they say, how do we get started doing strong towns, is go meet your neighbor. Like the first thing you should do is go meet your neighbor. And it's amazing, I just said that, go meet your neighbor. How many of you felt this tinge of discomfort with that, right? Like it's a very, oh my gosh, I don't like my neighbor, or my neighbor is, whatever. Your neighbor is like the person you need in your life. I think that the more that we can do to create trust in neighbors, the more we will see the other kind of cultural things we have to overcome become diminished and easier to deal with. I'm not one of these people who thinks that the way we resolve conflict is all of us hold hands and agree on things. I don't necessarily, I think that democracy is designed for disagreement. I think that the big thing that is different today is that cities of the past used to be places where conservative people lived with and lived next to liberal people and recognized that they needed each other. We need people who are really finely sensitive to the budget of our city. Like we need them. We need people who are very sensitive to order and decline. and are very like, I'm very attuned to that. But if that's all we have in our neighborhood, we will live in places that are despotic, that we hate. We also need people who are sensitive to the poor and the overburdened and the people who are struggling. We need people who are sensitive to that as well. And the reality is that when we have one neighborhood of people at this price point who have these sensitivities, and we have one neighborhood at one price point of these sensitivities, those become both dysfunctional places. It's like a yin and yang, like we need each other to, in a sense, balance out our worst proclivities and to use our best proclivities to greatest advance. So, meet your neighbors. That's where I would start. And I think the more we can focus on bottom-up ways of empowering people to work together to solve problems, the better off we're going to be. I'm a huge proponent, Strong Towns is a huge proponent of subsidiarity as a concept. And if you don't know subsidiarity, a lot of times it is translated into the lowest level of government or the lowest level of decision making that can competently do something should be the ones to do it. And that is half of subsidiarity. So if you can make a decision at the neighborhood level, there's no reason that should be made at the county level. That should be made at the neighborhood level. But the other half of subsidiarity that's often not acknowledged is that the role of the next layer of government or the next layer of decision making is to provide assistance to make the decision. So can you have chickens in your neighborhood? Can you have backyard chickens? Well, that is a decision that is often made at a citywide level. Why? Whether you have chickens has no effect on you in any way. Whether you have chickens has a big effect on you because you live right next door to each other. So you know what should happen? You two should sit down and figure out, can you have backyard chickens? Oh, but we don't get along. We don't talk to each other. Yeah, that's when the city should come out and say, look, I can't make this decision. You have to, but you have to reach a decision you both agree with. And I'm going to sit here and help you figure that out. But I can't take that away from you because that's disempowering you and it will lead to a dysfunctional government. So subsidiarity looks a lot more like having conflict resolution people on staff than having zoners on staff. Does that make sense? Okay. I don't have the mic, so I can't, I'm sorry.
Hi, Jim Truman.
Yes.
First of all, I want to echo everyone and say thank you for coming to Raleigh and Durham again. We always love to hear you.
Thank you. That's so kind.
Been listening to Strong Towns forever. I wanted to ask a little bit more local context question.
Yeah.
In Raleigh, we have ended parking minimums. We've adopted missing middle standards citywide. In Durham, they've expanded housing choices, and they're considering doing more with the upcoming SCAD, which I forget what it stands for, but something about affordable housing development.
Yeah.
But I would say we are in a backlash stage where public opinion is split on whether those policies are good for us or not. So we've made progress in making the next incremental step by right, but now we're having arguments with our neighbors about whether that's a good thing or not. And I'm just curious if you could speak to how to survive that backlash stage. How to be good advocates for the incremental idea that we can do it now, but how do we do it well and protect it?
Okay. It is a beautiful question, and I am going to do like a tiny bit of self-promotion in response. So Strong Towns as an organization is founded and created to try to help with that problem. When I was working as an engineer, when I was working as a planner, I started to write this blog, and my initial thought was, I will just help planners and engineers see this differently, and then everything will change. That was like the dumbest idea I ever had. Then I thought, well, I will have elected officials. If I can just get elected officials to know this stuff, everything will change. Again, kind of a dead end. Ultimately, what we recognized, and I say we, my board, and the people who helped me found and set up and create a strategic plan and vision for Strong Towns, is that what needs to happen is that we need to speak broadly to people who are actively involved and help them shift their thinking. And that is a very different undertaking. So we've structured our whole organization around the idea that we could do that. So what needs to happen is that in every neighborhood, in every city, there needs to be a conversation about this trajectory. And it needs to be based on not a theoretical, like here's a map of productivity because people don't care. It needs to be based on a real sense of the impact to people. If you go to our website, we publish 12 stories a week. We publish 3 podcasts a week. We do a video every other week. We put a huge emphasis on talking not to technical professionals and not to people necessarily inside the system, but talking to, I always use my dad as like the avatar that I'm writing to. If I can explain something to my dad in a way that makes my dad kind of motivated to think differently, I've accomplished something. And that's internally how we think about it. My dad is a mill worker, retired teacher then. Anything his son tells him is automatically suspect. Not gonna listen to that planning crap. So if I can talk something to my dad, so we're on every social media platform. We are, all this stuff in its Creative Commons license. We are trying to give you the language to use to talk to people about this. We are also just giving you, give someone this article, share this insight on social media, retweet something. It is astounding because we laugh at millennials and what have you for I did something, I retweeted. And I get it that's, not enough. But in a situation like this, where we're trying to move public opinion, it actually takes all of us having small conversations with a lot of people to shift that overall public opinion. Also keep in mind, and this as a last thought, this is the way I say it. Don't try to convince the person who lives in the exurb and drives the Hummer into the core of the city for work every day that they should take a bike. It's too large of a leap. That's not your low-hanging fruit. When we are having conversations with people and we're trying to convince them to do something different, most of convincing people is listening. And in a conversation, for every 10 words that we speak, we should have 90 words that we listen to. And if you do that, you actually find that you will learn something. You will learn something about how to communicate with that person and what really matters to them. And they'll feel listened to in a way that they will actually hear you then. And I think that we train our local conversations leaders to do that because it's a real important part of making neighborhood level change. Evan, I think you're amazing, and you're amazing because you have a way of talking about things that is so very positive. And you're not a fanatic. You're close, but you're not. But a fanatic, Winston Churchill said, a fanatic is someone who can't change their mind and won't change the subject. We want Strong Towns people to be zealous advocates, but short of being a fanatic, because we have to be human to change humans' hearts. Please.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah.
And I think there's stages to that.
There's stages.
I think
we all have a fanatic stage.
there is a fanatic.
Yeah, I know. I'm
leaning off of it.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more comment question here. I do want to point out, save the date, August 3rd, which is a Thursday. We are doing another Housing and Development Summit. Location and speaker to be announced, but save the date, August 3rd. It'll be a similar format, breakfast presentation. The goal of the next one is to find a local practitioner, someone here in our community that is actively engaged in making Raleigh, Durham, and all of our satellite cities into stronger towns. So save that date.
Bob Wiley, Durham. Like everyone in the room, I'm constantly bombarded with requests to donate money to charities. This check in your charity is 100% on Charity Navigator, which I've never seen.
Oh.
Can you comment on what it is about your organization that gets to that status?
I have no idea. I've never heard of.
I'll figure it out because a lot of people look at it.
I'm not familiar with Charity Navigator. I apologize. Am I?
Show of hands who knows about Charity Navigator. A lot of people.
Okay, so I need to inform myself. It's a ranking. And we're 100%. Wow, okay.
I'm thrilled to be able to do this.
Thank you. Okay. I feel like, I don't know. That's quite an honor. I will say, we care deeply about this message, and we have an amazing board of directors with a great vision. I feel like if you ask me, like, what is the difference about Strong Towns, we very early on recognized that we were not the hero of the story. We recognized that for us to be successful in our mission, that the best thing that we could be would be the guide. That the hero of the story has to be people out there doing the work in communities to make them better. And that our job was not to, at the end of the day, have a monument built to the geniuses who started Strong Towns. And our goal was not to, at the end of the day, have people show up to the Strong Towns conference so they could hear really smart people talk at them. We recognize that what success looks like for us is a lot of people feeling very vested in a different vision for how America could work, and then actually having the power and the capacity to go out and actualize that in their place. And I do think that in our space, in the nonprofit world, in the space of like urbanist advocacy, that does make us very different than other places. Very different. Maybe one other thing, we spend a lot of time crafting our message so that it is accessible to everyone. There's a debate going on this week on Twitter, and Twitter debates are a thing in themselves. I don't know how many of you have heard of the podcast and the website F Cars, and F is a full 4-letter word. And there's a tension because people want us to be anti-car and they want us to be in the F Cars crowd. And we recognize very pragmatically that 90% of Americans drive cars and own cars. And while, we certainly have a lot of insights about the way we design our cities around the automobile versus around humans, we're not at war with cars. We're not in a war on cars. That alienates some people on Twitter who want us to be the radical flame-throwing people. But I think for our members who are the heroes of our story, it makes it so they can go out and have real conversations with people that matter. And so we'll take that heat because it's important for the greater overall capacity to get stuff done. You have someone up here who's asking for the microphone.
Well, I might selfishly jump in front here.
Yeah.
Because it is 11.
But
I've read some stories on Strong Towns about some of your heroes, and I thought it might be good if you could just share like one example. I think there was one maybe like Chattanooga, Tennessee. There was a really cool story of...
Dude, I don't know.
Okay. There's a lot of stories.
You mean like places that I'm inspired by?
Like where communities have actually come togetger,
created
a coalition of neighbors, made changes, and changed outcomes.
I'll give you. We could do 2 hours on that. Let me give you the one that is my favorite. There's a building in Memphis, the Tennessee Brewery, that was like a 7-story building, brick, gorgeous building. And in Memphis, they're very poor. And to use this building. Everybody who came in had a plan for redoing the whole thing. Retail on the first floor, office on the second, third floor, residential all the way up after that. And they could never make it cash flow because Memphis is just very, very poor. And there's a lot of vacancies there, and like it never worked. But they were being taxed on this building, and they couldn't move the lot, they couldn't sell it. And so what the developers, what the owners of the lot were gonna do was spend $500,000 to tear this building down and have a vacant lot because they felt that they could then clear it off their books and sell it and stop the bleeding in a sense. It is a gorgeous building, and it just broke your heart to see this because people were trying to do something and it just wouldn't work, pencil out financially. Some neighbors, and Memphis is such a beautiful place. Memphis is like this wellspring of social capital. These neighbors said, would you let us use the building for 3 months? And at the end of 3 months, we'll sell it to us for the $500,000 you were gonna spend to raise it. Give us a purchase option. And they came to this agreement. And basically what they did is they took the first floor and they did like a kegger frat party every Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They brought in kegs from like microbrews around town so they could promote their brew, right? They, in the first floor, set up like lawn games. They would bring in a food truck. They'd have like plastic lawn chairs. They did like low value, like low investment kind of stuff. They swept it out. They made it kind of nice. The building was solid. It needed a new roof and all this. They cleared like $700,000 over the course of the summer, just being open 3 days a week with volunteers like staffing it, right? They bought the building, they fixed the roof, they spent time then over the next year finishing the first floor. And instead of having to finish the entire building all at once, what they have been doing is working floor by floor by floor. We got the roof fixed, so there's no like longer this kind of decline from the top. But now we can fix the first floor, and then that gave us the capacity to fix the second floor. I think they're on the third or fourth floor now, and the vision is to cash flow it all the way up with no debt. That is such an awesome story. And it is, what is awesome about it is that you find the people who were trying to fix it were stuck with top-down capital, and that limited their options. But once you went bottom-up capital, there's more money and more options. And we find that reality in so many different realms. So that's my favorite story. The Tennessee Brewery. If you search Tennessee Brewery Memphis, you'll get their website and you'll get this story. So, thank you.
So real quick, as I'm Evan's mom, Brenda, I want to say thank you as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you as well for coming. I really appreciate your approach. I appreciate in a world that we live in now that's so at times unrelentingly stark this way and that way. I really appreciate the way you're able to speak in a way, tone down in a way that reaches everybody, that crosses all paths. I really appreciate that. I'm new to Strong Towns, and we don't have all the answers, but as you can see, I have a very passionate son. Very really humility is one of his assets, and just love for people in general, and love for the planet, all those things. And he used to really fret over stuff when he couldn't like figure it out or fix it. And I would tell him to just do what you can in your own footprint. Mm-hmm. You might can't change the world today or change every policy in your city or in your neighborhoods or whatever. Just do what you can in your footprint, as he does with his little 22-year-old kid that he mentors. And so I think it's what you're saying is so perfect. Do what you can, be with your neighbor. Do what you can across the boundaries of our differences. And
I don't know if you know that is our saying that we sign off every podcast with, is keep doing what you can to build a strong town.
Cool.
So, thank you, everybody. Yay. Thank you.